Imagine leaving your home country to another country in hopes for a better life, only to end up being dragged out of your house, beaten, and set on fire because you're a foreigner. This is the tragic story of Elvis Nyathi, a 47-year-old Zimbabwean man who left Zimbabwe to South Africa in hopes for a better life. He settled in an area in Diepsloot with his wife, where he worked as a gardener. He was described as fun and outgoing by neighbors and people who knew him. He was also said to be lively. However, on the 6th of April 2022, a group of angry mob made up of predominantly South African indigenes stormed the suburbs of Diepsloot, going from house to house and asking people to present their passport and identification papers, just to prove they are legally in South Africa. Now, these mobs were not government officials. They were not sent by anyone in authority. This was said to be a vigilante group. It was said that Elvis and his wife were in the house when they heard that the mobs were looking for foreigners. Upon hearing it, Elvis fled. Elvis ran away because clearly he knew this was trouble. Unfortunately, Elvis couldn't run far. The mob caught up with him. He was beaten with sticks and then dragged back to his house. When he was brought back to his house in front of his wife, he was accused of being a criminal. But then he explained to them that he was a gardener. Just a quick glance at the house, the mob asked the wife how come they had 9 stains in their house. They were insinuating that if you say your husband is not a criminal, how come you have these 9 stains in your house? It was his wife who explained to them that the reason they have these things in their house is not because their husband is a thief, that their husband isn't a criminal. These 9 stains were given to them by the people she did domestic work for. While the husband is a gardener, she is a domestic worker to a lot of wealthy people who gift her things, which makes up some of the things in their house. The angry mob then went on to tell her to bring her husband's gun. They asked her to get his guns, in which the woman replied that they don't have any guns. Then some of the mob members went into their house to ransack the entire house, looking for a gun, and they did not find a gun. While all of this was going on, Elvis was tied to the ground just in front of his house, bleeding and in pains. He wasn't even talking. It was his wife that was doing all the talking because he had been beaten to the point he couldn't even speak no more. Then the mob asked the wife to get them 300 rand, in which the wife replied that they don't have that kind of money. And then they asked that the woman should give them anything, in which the woman eventually gives them 50 rand. Upon being given 50 rand, the mob were upset, and in that instant, Elvis was doused with petrol and set on fire right in front of his wife and a crowded neighborhood. This man burnt to his death to complete ashes. Now, this may look like a very ordinary mob action, but there is more to why Elvis Nyathi was lynched. You see, South Africa as a whole has a history of not being particularly nice to other black foreigners, especially the black foreigners who are working in their country. A few years ago, we saw how some South Africans treated Nigerians in their country, looting businesses owned by other black foreigners, causing a lot of other black foreigners to flee the country. So clearly, the black on black crime in South Africa is not a new thing. But why was Elvis' case a little extreme? It's not as if he is the only black foreigner in Diepsloot where he was killed. So why was his own case a little extreme? You see, in Diepsloot where Elvis was killed, it was said a total of 8 South African indigenes had been murdered at separate times and at different locations in the community. So there was a current case of people getting murdered in Diepsloot, and these murders were associated with robberies because these victims were shot and killed, which gave rise to the vigilante group that were going around asking for papers. They were tired and frustrated with the rates people were getting killed in Diepsloot. But the only problem was, instead of being thorough and playing with their investigation, they just assumed it was a foreigner who did it. With no particular foreigner in mind, saying that Elvis was also trying to run away after he heard that the mob were looking for foreigners who were in the country illegally, they just assumed that he may have been guilty of being involved in the killing of the 8 victims. The angry mob were trying to find the killers of these 8 victims that had been killed in recent times there in Diepsloot. So in the process of doing that, Elvis just thought that these people were looking for foreigners to extort. And that was why he ran away. He thought they were going to extort from him, But he did not know that they were actually going around looking for people to blame in the death that has been happening in Deep Slot. That was why they asked if he had a gun, and despite not finding any gun with him, they still assumed that he was guilty. As at the time of making this video, no one has been arrested in connection with the murder of Elvis Nyathi. The South African government have reached out to his family, extending condolences. A lot of groups have picked up the case, and some people are saying that they are trying to find the people involved in the killing, which we all know it's not going to happen, because this is not the first time black foreigners are being killed by South Africans in South Africa without them getting caught or arrested. But let's just hope that the police in South Africa does something about this. Let's just hope, because that's all we can do now. Elvis' wife has said to have returned back to Zimbabwe, or is planning to return back to Zimbabwe to join her 4 children over there. Thank God the children were not with her there in South Africa, because that would have been so traumatic. I do hope the South African government compensates her financially. It's not enough to send condolences. It's not enough to console her. She has lost a husband, and she has 4 children to take care of. The government needs to be considerate enough to give her enough money for her and her children, even if it means she will have to leave South Africa. She should be compensated. Because we know the killers would not be caught and arrested, because we know that. We know those people who were involved in the mob action that killed her husband will not be brought to book. So the best thing is for her and her family to be compensated financially by the South African government. Now, I read in some blogs that his life would have been saved if he had given the mob 300 rand. But I beg to differ. These people were accusing him of being a criminal. They saw a few nice things in his house and assumed that he stole them. When the wife explained how they got those things, that it was given as a gift, they proceeded to ask for 300 rand. If these people had provided 300 rand, that would have concluded and given this mob more reason to believe that he's a criminal. And I still think they would have done whatever they wanted to do to him. But do you think his life would have been spared if his wife and him had provided 300 rand? Do you think the angry mob would have let him go free if he had given them the money? I don't think so, but let me know what you think.